I could start. Oh yeah, we're gonna record it. Is that okay, everyone?
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wanting to welcome you all to Town Hall to talk about Leaders in Transition Working Group. It's something that I'm hoping to put together with a few people who have energy for this to help me in thought leadership as I move through the transition for the AEU. A lot of things have come up in the last couple of months that I've been here. I've talked to over 65 people, and a lot of interesting areas have come up, including, as I put in my town hall, some wicked problems. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what a wicked problem is. And I know that I gave you a bit of a link so you could get like some head start on it, but I have some other resources. And I sort of want to just allay your fears that it's not like the worst of all problems ever. That's not what wicked, really stands for. But it does mean that we have some work to do. And I'm hoping to not to partition leaders from lay leaders from leaders in training, because wicked problems really require a broad stakeholder contribution to address some of this. And it might even mean looking outside the AEU with allied groups to kind of get their perspective. Because if you look at all the literature on solving wicked problems, it does require something outside of even ourselves sometimes to get that kind of. So you can see here, oops, I went too far. Sorry. How do I go back? It's not responding. Okay.
You can click on the arrow at the lower left.
I did do that, yeah. Sometimes it doesn't like to do that. Okay, I'm just going to leave it like this for now, if I can. Still, we don't see it. All right, let's try this. Okay, so now you can see basically the purpose for the leaders in transition, leaders, lay leaders, leaders in training, is to provide thought partnership to me to create a vision of what we want the AEU to be in the future, to develop goals and deliverables for 4 to 6 months with action plans involved, to assess resources that we need to accomplish this, mobilize those resources, address unresolved harm, and de-stress the system. Pretty straightforward, not right? Any questions about that? So I just want to say, and I'm not equating climate crisis with the AEU. I'm trying to show you that what I'm equating is that when we don't solve problems, we end up in collapse or we end up in crisis. And these are some of the wicked problems we have been unable to solve. They seem pretty bad, and they are, but they're also they have a lot of similar characteristics of what a wicked problem is. And what is a wicked problem? It's not tougher than other problems. It has many causes and many explanations. There's no right answer to how to solve a wicked problem. There's only better and worse in the solving. There's no stopping rule or test to know if you solved it. And if you're the planner, because this comes out of planning and design thinking, if you're a planner and you're involved in this, you have to take responsibility for what the resolution is that you come up with. There's no like, oh, look, we came up with a solution and it didn't work. There's no, you can't go there because you only have one shot and then it's a different problem. So we take responsibility for it. And that the other characteristic is that every wicked problem may be a symptom of another problem. And that's something to unpack. I'm going to send you all these slides, so you don't have to take too many notes. You can just kind of read and absorb and think about it and say, what do you mean? Or ask questions or say whatever you feel like, but you will get these slides. So what can we do to solve our wicked problems? Here are some ways that the literature says we can do this. We can create a shared understanding of what the problem is. That's kind of really important. And I think right now there's a lot of non-agreement about what the problems are. So that we can, once we get on the same page, we can start not looking for opinions, but ways to manage the problem. Opinions will not help us in this situation. And reading, studying it will not help us. Both those things are not ways to solve a wicked problem. Studying results in procrastination. Wicked problems require decision-making, experimentation, and pilot programs. Sometimes we need, as I said, design thinking with outside stakeholders, dialogue mapping, so we can get everyone as close as possible to identify what everyone wants. And of course, all of this, once we decide what those problems are, to de-stress the system so that we can bring back more creativity, less contention, transparency, and moving forward. Comments, concerns?
Can we de-stress the system first, Rachel?
I would love to do that first, but it's sort of, and it might happen that way, but you'd have to address harms. And that is something we're going to address. You have to address harms in order to de-stress the system. Some of the harms might be wicked problems. And then here are just some resources for you that I will send to you. And I think that's pretty much it for this. Very simple. But I wanted to hear from all of you, now that you know what the purpose of this meeting is, what I'm thinking about, what I hope to do, what your thoughts are around a transition leadership working group, and what the problems are that you see that would be beneficial in de-stressing the system and in creating a vision forward for the future. And welcome everybody who came after I started. Kristen, Jay, Karen, thank you for coming. And you can either just raise your hand or just speak. You can unmute yourselves.
I'm just wondering, so as we're thinking, at the societies, we all have our own makeup. We're different. Every society is different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not one size is going to fit everybody. And wondering how to maneuver when that's the case.
We're sort of talking just about the AEU.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so all right, I'm glad I got that straight now. So this has nothing to do individual societies, it's at the level of the AEU.
Yeah, I'm not your interim executive director. You
Right.
know, I don't want to, and you all have a lot of independence and a lot of, things going on. I have no idea. I don't know anything, but I'm just talking about the AEU.
Yeah, gotcha.
So
I
what?
need some clarity on just what the problems are. I'm sorry, I feel out of this.
Yeah.
I'm not a leader at a society, and I'm not on the board of any society. Go ahead.
No, I appreciate your question, Alan. I think there have been, I mean, and maybe some of the leaders can speak to that, or the lay leaders who have been involved in issues that have come up that you want to address, or you think that we could do some things in the next 4 to 6 months to address those issues within the lay leader and training community. That's my question. What are the issues? What are the wicked problems? We don't have to agree on what they are.
I think I think if I was to speak and kind of think along these lines, and I think what is that there is somewhat regaining a sense of trust with our system around leadership, rather it's leadership committee, whether that is within the NLC, and how we think of those processes. We had a summer school program that actually supported, right, lay leadership, that was, that needed to be revisited, and it did not take place again, which was substantial for some of our folk who were a part of the movement, and they really looked forward to it. It was a way to keep abreast and keep feeling as if they were feeling, and not only feeling, but also kind of a training ground to kind of reimagine how they could equip themselves for their societies, right? I think as someone who is oftentimes at various different societies and going through the leader training program, there is, there's a question as to if our societies even have a trust in our training. Because most of our societies who do have leaders, right, end up possibly with somebody outside of the leadership. So we do have folk who are UU or come from the UA, and they oftentimes step into the role of occupying clergy or clergy leadership. And so how do we regain the trust in our system in that way is something. And I'm like I said, I'm speaking from a lived experience because I've applied to multiple different societies, but there's clearly, even though I've come out of this training program, those spaces are not available to me, right? And though we have our own polity, what does that mean for our societies to share and to have their own polity, but also depend on a system to provide strong leadership? And some of our training program, when we look at it, might need to be a little bit more robust in organizational and executive practice, because most of our societies, particularly if I may speak from experience with Patty, right? If our leaders are not trained in organizational management, there's no way that society is going to actually be robust in developing funding or development programming, or it's more than a platform, right? It's more than just being there. It's really knowing how to look at an organizational structure from that context. I think we also need to come into account with both lay leaders and leaders needing to be trained on conduct, sensitivity training. We are all sound intellects, I think, but sometimes our intellect gets in the way and causes us to have biases. And that's something, we're not all cut from the same cloth. All of the locations are different. Some, in some communities are more educationally advanced than others, which are more maybe working class. And so we have to consider all of those dynamics. Some of our congregations are, or communities are more culturally diverse versus others. And how do we work together in bridging that gap, which can happen through lay leadership and also leadership. So when we think about naming several wicked problems, I think it does require meetings like this and engaging a bit of a leader collaboratory. But I'll shut up. I don't want to take out too much space, but I hope this adds a little texture to some of our thinking as we begin to think about who we are, what roles we play, and whether we play them in somewhat like Alan's like, I'm not a leader, but I'm here, right? And it's because you have a heart and a recruiting heart for the movement, right? Patty is not a leader per se in the sense that we would say been through training, but is a president who guides their society, right? I want to see how we hold our capacity building. We have leaders in training here, so like there's also that can be brought to the table in the forefront. And how robust is our program for our leaders who also are already trained, maybe possibly in theology schools, right, which set us up to do this work. But at the same time, how does it speak to ethical culture, and what will the movement see as, something that is already a skill set, and maybe the training needs to be a little bit more geared towards something else.
Thank you, Jay. That was great. Thank you. I'll go right ahead, Robert.
Patty began the thought, and Jay has improvised around it. And I would put it in terms of Rachel's question about the AEU function. The AEU as an organization is really a collection of societies and is also a board. And about whom are we talking? That's one problem. But once we can decide that, it's hard for the AEU to shepherd a group of so different communities. It would be like being a shepherd herding cats, crows, and guppies at the same time. So how does the AEU how can we consider the AEU as a good shepherd for that kind of diverse flock? I think that's an AEU problem, and it may be a wicked problem. I'm not entirely sure.
Thank you. Kay? You're still muted, Kay, sorry.
What you bring up, Bob, I think is an issue in that how does the AEU provide, if you will, a managerial overview resource that is consistent throughout societies, yet allowing the societies to have their own culture, their own face, their own voice. So it's the case of rather than the AEU telling societies what to do, say these are the resources that you need to be able to function as a society. Or do you have your lay leaders? Do you have managerial things? Do you have the expertise? There's some, I feel, ways that we've really been missing in terms of the AEU providing broad resources that we all can take advantage of. And that can be in terms of communication, in terms of skills, in terms of, how do you do a good search? How do you set up a good, job description? How do you, a lot of things that may seem just automatic are not automatic. And I don't know, I would venture to say that not every society has the resources to set it up in a way that will help us all function well and individually.
Mm-hmm. That's a good wicked problem. I like it. Greg?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to kind of talk around what's a little bit of a knot in my head. I'm wondering what our mechanisms for mutual support and mutual accountability are, not just theoretical or philosophical, but actual and practicable. I'm wondering whether they can be scalable to us as individuals, as people fulfilling roles in groups or committees, and then our corporate bodies and our institutions. And this speaks a little bit, I think, to Kay, what you were saying is that it is unclear to me the relationships between each of our recognized bodies, the AEU, the NLC, the board, and then the individual societies. And with those relationships unclear, I think it's very challenging then to come to the table to offer quote unquote shared resources. And so I think the broader question for me is, what is our movement's polity? Not only the individual polity of each society and what the society is empowered to do, but what is our movement's polity? And how is the authority for that polity substantiated? Because if there's disagreement about that, then there's going to be tension in every relationship that we have throughout the organization and throughout the movement. I'm wondering how it is both prescriptive and descriptive. And so the prescriptive is the actual mechanism. So let's say, for instance, there is misconduct. What now? We should have ready answers to what now. And descriptively, what are the philosophies or theologies that tell us why was it misconduct in the first place? So that we can come back to it and say, do we invite this person back in a relationship? Is that possible? And I'm using misconduct in a very broad sense, not simply clergy misconduct. So, you know, what is our organizational praxis? Recognizing what is actual right now in the moment, and then what is aspirational for us. And regarding the aspirational, how do we get there? We need a roadmap. So that's a little bit of the knot that's in my head right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. That's great.
Hi, this is Karen. We're sorry, I have enough spot. I can't actually raise my hand. So I'm just going to jump in. And I want to definitely echo Jay and Greg, who were just speaking. I think they raised a lot of the points I was thinking about. And it seems to me that power relationships are a key issue. I think there's obviously they're different in different societies, but I think there's a lot of lack of clarity of the role of, you know, society presidents, AEU board, leaders council, et cetera. And obviously there's a distinct differentiation in terms of who is paid to pay attention, who has time to pay attention, who has authority and autonomy to act, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that leads also to very uneven degrees of knowledge about the wicked problems, other than the sense that there are some wicked problems. So I think that that's an issue. And I think that accountability in terms of, you know, in its kindest interpretation, in terms of we are committing to and being called to our best selves is a key thing. And I think candor is necessary to get at some of that. And I think that has probably been also a wicked problem. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. I really appreciate that. Hugh, please.
I'll just jump in and just sort of I agree with what's been said, in particular, the issue of regaining trust. I think it's a huge issue. I think there's a lack of healthy communication practices that was referred to earlier. I think that I would want to add that I think we're in a point in time where we have to rethink what leadership is, what it means, how it functions. I mean, I don't necessarily fully understand how we switch from a more hierarchical, patriarchal tradition to a more horizontal, egalitarian tradition, but that clearly has to happen. That dips into anti-oppression work. Jay talked a little bit about that as well. So I was just highlighting a couple of those themes that have been mentioned, but wanting to add the whole idea that I look at this historically as a long-term thing. It's almost generational. I mean, we're going to change one way or the other, and we need to be more intentional. Thanks.
Thank you. Awesome. Joan.
Yeah, I will also ditto that, you know, we've had long-term trust problems. Some of those have certainly been contributed to by acts of people, and some are contributed to, I believe, and it's my experience as a, you know, in conversation and across multiple societies, that a lot of people come into our movement with religious trauma and trauma around religious leadership. And so I think those are pieces of that puzzle to really think about. Clarity about communication and who does what, and scopes of responsibility and scopes of authority are important. I would also urge that as we think about this, that we remember that it's very well documented that congregations of different sizes often have within them different power relationships. The boards have somewhat different functions in a 30-member society and a 300-member society. And the relationship of the leader to the community can be very different in different sizes. And that's that's across religious bodies, and it's a function simply of size and how much you can do in that size. So I would urge that we also remember that that's a kind of diversity to consider, that one size fits all for some of these issues just doesn't work.
Thanks, Jen. Anybody
And
else?
I would like to actually put, and he can reject me. I'm just gonna be honest though. I think John Dakin could add some brilliance to the space too regarding the CLP model, and also figuring out when we're talking about one size fits all, there's some critical components regarding those societies and how they differentiate, and how he had to be flexible in trying to understand how to meet those needs. And logistically, I think that is something, and procedurally, that I think that's something that John can speak to. So I do see Jora, if I may say his name incorrectly, pardon me. But yeah, I would love to hear John hop in on that too after our neighbor speaks here.
Yeah, and I would also ask Anya if she has anything to add, because she grew up and has a deep knowledge of ethical culture that I think adds a lot to this conversation. Thanks, John.
You want me to talk? Should I go? Is it my turn? Thank you. And so good to see so many people that I know in this, on one screen. It's really nice. And I love your the enthusiasm and the deep concerns I'm hearing about the leadership and the workings of the society. But I want to add that my feeling is that the AEU is also a movement, and a wicked problem I see is that we don't have enough people in our movement besides the inner workings of it. Like, where are all those millions of people that I know are ethical culturists? How come they don't know us? They don't find us? And I think that's a real wicked problem. How do we reach people in this day and age when going to congregations in buildings to be with listen to a leader is actually not what people do Sunday mornings? There's a whole, this is not the, and yet we are, I don't think ethical culture to me, is about getting people to come into these meeting houses. It's not that it's not that, but it isn't limited to that. And there's much more that I think we should be seeing, and we're seeing it in a lot of Zoom meetings. That we are an international sort of gathering. I go to meetings in Rochester, Chicago, Baltimore, Brooklyn, and New York, and that's on a regular basis, besides the unusual things happening, because we have really terrific programs. So I just wanted to say that's my, I think that's a problem for me.
Thank you, Jor. John, sorry about that. Go ahead. Sorry.
I have my camera off because I was here I considered myself here as a guest, because my sense of the duality of the two working groups you're pursuing, Rachel, in context, I think of this group as being more for people who are clergy or who serve in sacred sorts of roles, as I would describe it. I feel like I'm a past president of a large society, but it was so different from the role of people, even our officiants who hold the space on a Sunday, who aren't certified. So I just want to name that. On the other hand, I do appreciate the invitation from Jay, and I was wondering if my ears perked up when I heard my name. I was wondering if you could repeat your invitation to me to make a comment.
Yeah, I'm very interested as we've been speaking about policy and particularly around your work around the CLP, right? How you met the needs of these diverse societies. They were all different. And as they were different, how did you meet the needs? How did you I mean, there was just something that was very unique about your approach. And I'm curious if you can speak to that so that we can also do what Greg kind of also added, which is kind of think about because there's something about the CLP that was very unique in its model that allowed for it to speak to the society's need.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. What I thought about in part of my contribution to the CLP was to ground it around a relationship between society and its leader. And to really try to, and I thought that was important enough that I thought we should have two committees involved in making it happen. The leadership committee for the leader side and the membership committee, which I chair, on the society side. And so what working with Liz Collier, my collaborator on the leadership committee, the chair of the leadership committee, and those of you who may have participated, we crafted a survey that helped, not really a survey, but first thing it was a tool to help the society really clarify what it was looking for. And then could then share that with clergy candidates so they could decide if they wanted to provide that and then craft together a plan together what they might want to accomplish. So it was kind of pointy headed and programmatic in some ways, but the idea behind it was building a relationship.
Can you speak? I will say, so I'm going to go a little bit further and you can just correct me if I'm wrong. So as we think about this, and I want to add this to like Rachel's notes and things. One thing that was very unique about the CLP when there was an application involved, the idea originated with Susquehanna seeking a leader. However, there were other societies that needed to have and were very interested in having a leader. Now, I know I'm specifically talking about ethical culture leaders, and I want to also expand this framework also to lay leaders and so on and so forth, who do end up taking a bulk of the work, handling programming, speaking to the societies, allowing for that to be kind of the generating framework. But I do recall that we were very interested, if the society was interested in developing new membership, if the societies were interested in fundraising, if the societies were interested in programming, if the societies were interested in other kinds of resources. There was a list in that application that specified specifically the various needs to avoid that one size fits all. And that is something that is essential. But I think one of the things that is challenging with that is that most of our societies have yet to realize what they need, because they want everything if they can have it and if they can see it in its richest form. And one of the things about it being in its richest form is that our societies may want these things, but it might not be the climate, if you will, regarding the environment of that society. And so who are we as lay leaders, emerging leaders, or leaders in training, if we use bylaw terms, but emerging leaders is who I'm talking about. And who are we as also ethical cultural leaders to cultivate this space where the movement is kind of generating a cohesion between all the societies and a real movement that speaks to the diversity and that speaks to the what ethical culture is as a very unique place that holds the integrity fostering those relationships. And then John, I think you did a very good job. I want to name that in figuring out what those fosterings were. And I want to close up by also like kind of segueing into Anya, who has been in relationship, right, with our movement. And I mean, these are some great thinking partners in this space. Even though they're very, and look, these are the folk who are also on the board, but I want to acknowledge that they are actually thinking partners in this space, right? To help us kind of figure out how we're moving and what Rachel's bringing before us today. So Rachel, I'm sorry, Anya, if you can actually speak to you coming from such a robust society and what that looks like for you to have healthy leadership, healthy lay leaders, and how it has informed your practice, right, to some degree. So those are two things in there, right? You having this practice of engaging leadership, and right, and you being someone also ushering your own leadership practice, even as someone who has handled international relationships, right? How does that, if you can speak to that, that might also help us figure out a good mapping as well.
Okay, there's a lot there. I think, you know, I really benefited from having grown up through the programming in St. Louis since I was 5. So really pretty long history, and really neat too. I think the programming in St. Louis was, at least through the time that I was there, really formative for me. That's why I have stuck around for this long and came into leadership and am invested in, you know, facilitating, you know, important informational work that we're now engaged in. I mean, I think, you know, having a community like that is invaluable. And I think that's the thing that a lot of young people are really lacking today. And I mean, I had this conversation with somebody earlier. I mean, I have this conversation a lot with a lot of people, but, you know, the population of religious nuns has been steadily rising for years. But these secular movements, not just ethical culture, but a number of them have struggled to grow alongside that. And a lot of people, you know, have rightfully been asking why that is. And it's, I think it's a really hard question to dig into because I personally believe that the root of these problems involve a lot of internal work, a lot of questioning our own participation in systems that can be destructive. And I think one of the things that makes ethical culture specifically in the context of the greater humanist umbrella really special is that we have these clergy people. It's very unique. I mean, ethical culture is not as well known as it once was internationally, but people are always surprised to hear that is a practice that we've been able to uphold for as long as we have. And I think the risk that we often run with the traditions and the way that we've relied on them for a number of years is that we fall back into these kind of toxic patterns that the church often that we often criticize the church for. And that might be kind of hard to hear, but I think that, you know, a lot of people traumatized by religion can feel that. They can sense that there's this tension, whether or not they're really aware of the ins and outs of, you know, issues within the movement. That's kind of my take, is that we have this really unique offering in the framework of humanism. And if we could find a way to really get in right relation with the way that clergy and laity and the way that we work together and kind of navigate this power dynamic issue, I think we could be really quite a model to aspire to. I mean, I know that other humanist movements like I said, struggle with this exact same thing, with this growth challenge, with this exposure challenge, with this joining and retention problem. But they don't have clergy people that can help them build that reputation. So that's something very unique that has the potential for a lot of growth, but also it can have the potential for a lot of toxicity. And I think that that's kind of what we're trying to get to the heart of. It's just very difficult to talk about because it is a sensitive matter. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Anya. That was very insightful. I have a question, if that's okay. I don't know if you can answer it. And maybe John wants to jump into, when you were doing the CLP program, is it only for leaders who could apply and societies could apply to match, or could lay leaders also apply and provide support in societies that perhaps didn't want a leader, but wanted more interaction and relationship with people who have taken it upon themselves to be lay leaders?
I would just comment that I think the genesis of the CLP came from the leadership committee who did a survey.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm wondering if Randy, we're all taking turns picking on each other, but I'm wondering if Randy might like to say something.
Yeah, no, the goal of the CLP was to match leaders with societies that were interested in development, and they tried to match the strengths of the leaders to the needs of the societies, and that's what the CLP did.
Okay.
It did not open the doors for other types of consulting relationships other than leader and society.
I get to go a little farther because I'm I'm not a leader. I think part of it also was to help ensure that our movement, which fewer and fewer societies had paid clergy leaders, and we're losing a collective memory of what it's like to have a professional, that it was leaning into the consultant model as opposed to a traditional pastoral model.
Yeah.
So that it really created a way to really introduce our societies to professional leadership. So I think that's why having lay people at the outset, having lay people in that kind of a role would kind of have defeated part of the purpose of that, if that's helpful. I mean, of course, there's a valuable role for lay leadership, and you can think of that perhaps as kind of a second tier element that certainly could be developed.
Yeah.
That's John. Yeah, I'm just speaking because we did take part in the program, and it was our small society wanting to see what it would be like to actually have the leadership that your larger societies have.
Right.
And knowing if this was something that we wanted to be able to work towards at some point, being able to support a leader.
That makes sense. I mean, I would not think of it as one or the other, but both and in some instances, especially with societies that have, robust lay leadership and, to support, that kind of transmittal of information and training and support, even if it's not at the leadership level, can be very valuable depending, Interesting.
And it was valuable, very valuable, and so, yeah, I'm listening and liking what folks are coming up with. And so just as me not being a leader, and just, you go ahead.
Hey, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to name that one of the challenges, as I was fortunate enough to participate in that programming. One of the challenges that does come with that is that, like, when we think about like where our leaders are located versus where the society is, that can be a very economical difference. That can be a thing. And so there is that challenge. And so I just want to name that because that was a big thing for some of us. And if we're not talking, I mean, right, and I know we're using, I'm asking us to kind of visualize the question. I want to reiterate this, that I'm asking us to somewhat visualize this collective thought around how the CLP was done, because I believe that it is a very healthy model to reimagine what the power of polity and relationship building. And I think that is something that has really been into question regarding how we trust and develop trust with those who are in our movement, and how we also present ourselves within this movement as leaders, as lay leaders, as leaders in training and preparing to go forward. And how do we help our societies develop models that are inclusive, that are radically built on equity, that are engaging with various frameworks around differences, whether that's neurodivergency, whether that's disabilities, whether that is right around race, or whether that is around even also sometimes maybe religious formation. You know, and I think that the way that we approach this work, you know, and the way that we kind of engage with the CLP kind of creates a preliminary sketch of that, and how leaders and how lay leaders and how leaders in training can develop what Kay is talking about, right? A new framework for managing, creating a management system that the AEU can look at and say, well, did we hit these goals? Are they measurable, in the words of Greg, right? Are these measurable deliverables? And I am curious, if you will, considering that we have some other thought partners in another pocket, right, of NOC reps here in this space, who are able to also, which is something I really deeply believe in my role, in trying to create a conversation that establishes not only healthy leadership, in addition to, right, healthy relationship, that informs how we can help all societies benefit from real measurable procedures and practices that inform our mission. Right? What is your mission? How are we going to create measurable goals to achieve it, and not be stuck and feeling like it's not being met? Because the AEU, for most of us, we understand it as a belt, right? It's wrapped around the waist. So we're holding the Federation of Societies together, right? And we're going to do this work. But if the belt doesn't fit you, we need to know that, right? I don't know if anybody can speak to the idea of, like, have you ever felt like the AEU as a quote movement has not provided the momentum for you to be mobilized? I'm curious about that as someone who sits on the NLC. Have you ever felt, right, if the AEU is a movement for you, how has it helped you mobilize? If it has not, can you also speak to that? Because that will help us get some texture on how we can move forward.
I think for me, it kind of goes back to when I said every society is very different. We're in a different, our demographics are different. And sometimes I feel that some of what the AEU feels we should mobilize around, whether it be a statement made, or it seems to be very much centered in a more urban kind of framework. And, you know, when you're looking at someone like this society who is very much in farm country, Amish, Mennonite, you name it, we do not have that same sort of feel that that is an issue that we should be focusing on. So yeah, it's how, how can the AEU as a movement recognize that not all issues hit societies the same way, and the amount of manpower a society wants to put into that particular issue might not resonate with the community.
This is Karen jumping in again, and not at all to discount what Patty was just saying, because I think you're exactly right in terms of the way that issues land in a particular context and the resources that you, including human resources that you have available to address them. But I'll be quite honest, I laugh every time I hear the word movement, because we're so small that we hardly feel like a movement. And it seems to me that there are sufficient issues that are broadly shared across our movement, across all of the AEU societies, that we could all benefit from some attention and some work in those areas. Obviously they'll play out in different ways, and not, again, not trying to be proscriptive about this is going to work for everybody, but it just seems like if we spend a lot of time worrying about how certain things don't fit in certain places, that prevents us from doing anything about the things that would serve all of us. I just feel like, we risk missing the forest for the trees sometimes. And so that's just a concern, a dynamic concern I have. But I completely agree with you, Patty, right? That things are different every place. But I think, as with our ethical manifold, like we talk about, eliciting the best in the human spirit and each unique person, the same would be true for societies, right? We can have a collective ideal, and there are lots of dynamics that would apply every which way, and we would do it with the sensitivity around the particularities.
Karen, hearing you speak makes me think back to my days at the Washington Society, and one of the things that I think we need to address is, how do we create volunteer and lay leadership opportunities that inspire and uplift more than drain and burn out? Because Washington was great at doing that. I saw a community where people who got involved usually, left feeling they did a good job. I mean, after their volunteer time was over. And I think that we need to do that as a movement as a whole more. How is the process of volunteering as important in my spiritual quest as the work that I do? And so I guess I'm just thinking that is very important, because we're burning out people left and right in different areas of both the national organization and individual societies. That's it.
Yeah, agreed. Totally. Anybody else want to say anything? We only have a few minutes left. My question to you is, if you could just let me know, send me an email after this, if you have energy to work with me on some of the things that came up tonight. We'll collectively, I like what Jay called it, a collaboratory work on these issues for the next, we'll pick our issues, we'll talk, we'll figure it out, we'll have a work plan, we'll have deliverables. And we'll act. We're not going to study it, we're going to act, because that's what these problems require. And we'll see how it goes. We'll put some energy into the system, see if we can push it forward. That is my intention, of course, is not to talk, but, for the rest of our lives, but to do something. So, anything else that people want to talk about before we go off to our evenings?
Looks like Ken has something to say.
Ken, go. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Ken, go for it.
Thanks, Jay. We at base we have a narrow range of community models, and if I ran the zoo, I'd probably change a couple of words in our mission, in that first mission sentence. But the first word I take out is ethical. I think we should be nurturing. I take creates out because there's no evidence that's actually happened. But at least in my experience, not creating, but nurture and inspire humanist communities. Just because people who live as we live as we do, live as humanists, but don't want to spend a particular part of their week with talking about particular things, still deserve community. And it's clear. It's clear from Holt Lundstedt, Julia et al. That an hour more involvement with other people will lengthen one's age. It's just look it up, Holt Lundstedt with a hyphen between it. So restricting ourselves with some what I call 19th century language that puts people off, as among other things. I just think we should be looking wider. Joan Johnson taught me years ago about drawing a larger circle, and I think we should be drawing larger circles, and more specifically in terms of the CLP and John's comment about whether lay leadership would be valuable. Unless lay leadership shepherds well, we never get to the point where we can afford a leader. It's like Harold Hill coming into town and saying, "This is what 76 trombone sounds like." Now,
Yeah.
Best of luck. I think we don't do enough to on the engineering of intentional community. And we are the subject matter experts in the humanist movement on long-term intentional community. And I think I think we should be looking larger. And I'm really, really excited about all the diversity and depth of views I've heard tonight.
Thank you, Ken. And I will be incorporating people who are not in other similar aligned organizations that we've worked with, because we need a bigger perspective. There's just no question. And I appreciate what you just said. Very cool.
Really fast, I'm just going to close up myself and just ask, how do we continue this work that just happened tonight, right? I mean, because I know you as the interim director are moving and trying to make things, get a complete overview. Is there a way that we can continue this practice?
Yeah.
And how would you like for us to kind of support and capture and give you feedback to hold this information, and not only hold this information, but to implement it?
Yeah, for sure. Once I have my little working group together, I was hoping that we'll create a work plan, and then maybe we could meet back here when that's done, hopefully within the next few weeks, a month at the longest, and we can reconvene and go over kind of the implementation plan, the goals, all of that, and just kind of meet monthly, if not more often. We don't want to wear people out, but so, and get that feedback. So if that's cool to, we'll put a monthly check-in with everybody here and anybody who wants to join. Does that work?
Well, yeah, I mean, I will say I'm glad to hold space. I can send out a calendar invite to anybody else who is interested in trying to capture this information. I think, and I don't say that with just putting my NLC hat on. I actually say that as like, I really want to see our movement win. right? I'm about folk who want to win. And not win because it's about their, about their own ego, winning because we know that there's a collective win about what we do here. So I can say that I'm willing to put myself forward and trying to maintain and facilitate that relationship so that we can get this information and capture it so that we can create real strategic maps with the support of all this brilliance in the room. Because this is very moving for me to see y'all. So I want to say thank you first. And I want to say thank you, Rachel, for creating the vision for it, right? But I just want to say that I am glad my hands are in to really, as my like Zoom is trying to put my hand back up, right? As in, I'm gonna lower it again. Hello, advanced technology. But I just want to say that I'm glad to like hold that space if you need me to hold that space until we find someone who also wants to spearhead that.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. I will definitely take you up on it. And really anybody else, and I will send out the chat so you can all see kind of what happened here in the chat. Anyone else, just contact me, text me, email me, and I'll let you know when the next thing is that we're gonna do, for sure. It'll be soon. And there's my email. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jake, for coming tonight and helping us with this. You're awesome.
Yeah,
Three
thank you,
cheers for
Rachel.
ethical. Hip, hip, ethical. Hip, hip, ethical. Hip, hip, ethical. And if you want to be a humanist, go for it too. But let's we have the best brand. We just need to sing the song.
That's right. The song.
It's what ethical.
I love it.
Anyway, I'm going to work on a tune.
Okay, so was this good? Did this work
Yes.
for you?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's great to bring all these all the voices together. But I agree. We need to do a lot of experimenting.
It's a start.
It is. Yeah. Okay, good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Rachel.
Oh, Rachel, you're muted. Rachel, you're still muted.
You're still muted, Rachel.
I am sorry. Go have fun, Jake. And we have to send the transcript to everyone. So we'll do that tomorrow, okay?
Yep, sounds good. I'll send you a list of everyone who participated, and I'll send a transcript in addition to that.
You rock.
Thank you. Have a good night, Rachel. Have a good night, Jay.
Thank
Night,
you.
Jay. Thank you so much.
Christian, are you still there? Hello.
Christian, come on, family. What's good?
Come on, show us. Maybe he left. He left and is watching a movie.
He's probably busy. He's probably working because I know he has a lot of new projects happening. And I know he tries to be present and things like that. So yeah, I'm gonna give you a call.
Okay.
And unless you can send him to the waiting room.
I can make him go bye-bye, I think.
And then in recording.
Yeah, I will. Oh yeah, we didn't end recording.